on Sunday, the 26th of October, 2025, the Republic of Seychelles witnessed a defining moment. So we had Dr. Patrick Herminie was sworn in as president, pledging to heal divisions and to defend national sovereignty. So the ceremony was more than just protocol. This was symbolism in action, where we saw the president and the vice president standing shoulder to shoulder on that beautiful ceremony. And a few days later, I think it was the next day or so, I'm not sure about that, we saw the vice president also being sworn in, joined by their families, and it was a very beautiful scene to see. But for many sociologists watching that historic moment, another picture lingered. So the presence of India's vice president at the inauguration ceremony revived old anxieties, a reminder of a failed military base agreement once proposed between India and the Seychelles in 2018. And now, when we talk about the presence of the Indian vice president, we are talking of something big. Now, as far as I know, when I see the Prime Minister Modi, wherever you see him, you see India. So he's a very powerful man. But then this goes above and beyond to invite the vice president of India, which is such a big deal. So the question that we really have to be asking here is, has India truly stepped away from the Assumption Island, or is this the beginning of a diplomatic return under new circumstances? And this is what this video attempts to address. So from the time Dr. Patrick Herminie won the elections, it didn't take long for the new president's stance on foreign involvement in Seychelles to become clear. So soon after taking office, President Herminie made a decision that caught the nation's eye. So the man appeared on the BBC and he called the Assumption Island deal peanuts for paradise. So he did say that he thinks that the Seychelles did not get a good deal as a result of the Assumption Island. So he announced the suspension of the 70-year Qatari-funded resort deal on the Assumption Island. Obviously, the reason why he suspended it, according to many, is to review the deal and to make sure that that deal is right for the Seychelles. However, on the other hand, we saw a lot of other critics that were saying, well, the reason why he suspended that particular project is to pave way for the Indians in readiness for the military deal with the Indians that has been pending for a very long time now. Now, looking at what the president has done with the Qatari-based project by halting it, pending investigations, I think he sent a very clear and strong message to the international community that the Seychelles wants to take its own destiny. The Seychelles values its own sovereignty, and if you want to do business with the Seychelles, then you have to be on the page of the Seychelles people. And I think this is the same sort of token that people want to see happening with every other project that will happen, particularly something involving foreign control. So we've seen he's handled this particular project by halting it with a lot of dignity, with a lot of praise, with a lot of applause. So people want to see whether the same spirit will prevail when dealing with the military base. So what is this talked about deal between India and the Seychelles that never really made it to parliament? So there was a 20-year deal apparently that was signed. This is a military deal that was signed between India and the Seychelles. However, it never reached parliament. So this deal was never ratified by parliament, but it's quite an in-depth paper, an in-depth agreement between the India and the Seychelles. Now, to be able to get this particular document, obviously, it's going to be very, very hard, as even at the time, there's a lot of secrecy surrounding this particular deal. So here is what truly happened. So the deal was signed by the executive, but never tabled before the National Assembly, which was then led by the opposition. So the opposition at the time was the LDS under Mr. Wavo Ramkalawan. So he totally refused. He was not even going to entertain it. He was not even going to do anything about it. And this is how the deal simply died and never made its way to the National Assembly. So the lawmakers under Wavo Ramkalawan's LDS party publicly declared they would not approve any agreement that allowed foreign military control on Seychelles soil. They made it clear and they cited these concerns that sovereignty, environmental protection, and transparency was the main issue why they were not going to consider it. So at that point, it was considered a dead deal. It never went any further and the deal collapsed. Now, it is worth mentioning at this point that at the time all these negotiations were happening, the LDS party had an upper hand over the United Seychelles Party in the National Assembly. So even though the documents existed, and from what people are saying, the 20-year deal was such an extensive deal, I must say that at that point, obviously, there was no jetty that was built. There was no military facilities that were built. There was no runway that was built. It was only the memory of a 20-year plan that never reached Parliament. Now, the issue is, now that we have the United Seychelles Party in control, the very same party that wanted to see this deal through in 2018 has now got the majority of the National Assembly in 2025 with 19 seats against the 15 seats of the LDS. That means obviously they've got the upper hand. Will this deal go through Parliament? Will the deal get ratified? Should it be presented to Parliament? So when that deal failed between the India and the Seychelles in 2018 under President Danifo, obviously the Indians did not completely walk away. So the Indians were quietly influential in the region. They did quite a lot of activities. They worked very closely with the government of Seychelles at the time under President Danifo. So it continued providing different kinds of assistance, different kinds of activities. So it continued providing things like the Dornier aircraft, and I'm sure it provided two of them. The first Dornier aircraft was donated in 2013, and the other one, I think, somewhere around 2018. So it donated patrol boats, the radar systems, framed as support for Seychelles maritime security. So they made it very clear this is not about control. This is about providing Seychelles with security within the EEZ, which is the Environmental Economic Zone, something like that. So these initiatives between India and the Seychelles obviously improve security when it comes to drugs coming into the country as well. So there's a little bit of effective surveillance, if you like, within the waters to make sure that the Seychelles remained a safe place and also within the region. A lot of people saw this as a good deal and a good gesture by the Indians to provide security around the region and to provide stability for the Seychelles people. So that means all the illicit drugs and all these other things that were coming legally into the country were being closely monitored by the help of the surveillance systems, the radar systems that were sponsored by the Indians. But again, on the Indians' part, the question that is being asked is, what are they doing this for? You know, is it just for diplomatic relations, or is it because they're still trying to find a way to convince the Seychelles people to possibly at one point or another build this military base? So whatever happens with the president, I think he's formed up a very strong legacy from the time that he halted the Qatari-based project. So that means whatever he does going forward, his policies, particularly his foreign policy, a lot of people would want to see this openness and want to see the transparency with whatever things that he does. And similarly, now when it comes to the military project with the Indians, a lot of people would want to see how the president juggles around and how he does his things. Now, there's no denying the fact that India and Seychelles have had relations way back. We are talking about 200, 300 years ago, because of the way India is with the Seychelles, they're very close proximities of each other. So most of their things are embedded together. In fact, we've got people that are of Indian heritage that have always lived in the Seychelles and vice versa. So this is something that dates back to way back, and India and the Seychelles will always, to some, be seen as inseparable. So when we talk about this military deal, this is just a small thing, but in terms of the culture, in terms of the integration, and the way people have always identified with each other from way back, this says a lot. So what we can conclude at this point is that the story of the Assumption Island is not over. But for now, the nation has drawn its line. It's very clear with what President Herminie has done with the Qatari-based project. He's made it very clear that whoever wants to do business with the Seychelles has to be open. They've got to be transparent. And the way he dealt with the issue, he was very bold, he was very decisive, and was very certain that he was going to hold to this particular project until they see that this project was worthwhile for the Seychelles people. Now, in the same token, a lot of people will be looking at whether the president will accord the same attention, will accord the same sort of agency and the same sort of boldness and decisiveness to the military base issue with the Indians. Now, having said this, this is very clear that this issue to do with the military base will not be debated quietly. And I don't think the people of the Seychelles will allow secrecy surrounding this particular project. And in the same way, the president has set his own precedents by making sure that the Qatari-based project is dealt with transparency, is dealt with openness. And I'm sure this is the same sort of example, the same sort of spirit that the people of Seychelles would want to see the president deal with the military base. So until then, this is what we are reclaiming.